Sports and politics. These two spheres may seem completely independent of each other. After all, sports, with its excitement and competitiveness, attract millions of fans from all over the world, uniting them regardless of their political preferences. But it's only at first glance. Upon closer examination, it becomes apparent that sports and politics intertwine at various levels and influence each other. Major sports events have long ceased to be just about sports. They have become cultural phenomena, uniquely capable of bringing people of different backgrounds together. However, throughout much of the history of modern big sports, it has become a powerful tool for political propaganda, a platform for diplomatic games and behind-the-scenes negotiations. Today, we are discussing how politics has influenced and continues to influence big sports. Modern big sports began with the revival of the Olympic Games in 1896. The first Olympics in Athens became the first mass sports event in modern history. In the same year, the first World Figure Skating Championship was held. Subsequently, in the first half of the 20th century, championships in the most popular sports became an integral part of the sporting life. Over time, the Olympic Games, international tournaments, and championships have turned not only into spectacular events, but also a very big business. Moreover, they have become a diplomatic platform for informal meetings and negotiations. Politicians and big businessmen use them to address important matters in an unofficial and friendly atmosphere. Politicians have long understood that sports have a tremendous impact on public opinion and people's moods. Sporting victories in international competitions become a source of pride for a country, and athletes became national heroes and superstars. Political leaders exploit the success of athletes not only to strengthen patriotic feelings in society. Due to the fact that athletes are public figures who are loved and respected, political parties do not miss the opportunity to take advantage of this. In totalitarian regimes, they serve the authorities and play a crucial role in the propaganda system. Hosting the Olympic Games and major championships in popular sports, such as football, hockey, or figure skating, usually requires huge financial investments. However, host countries make ample use of these events to promote their political systems through propaganda. The second FIFA World Cup took place in 1934 in Italy, the homeland of fascism. The choice of Italy as the host country was surrounded by scandals with allegations of bribery and intimidation. Italian football official Giovanni Mauro strongly lobbied for hosting the championship in his country. He informed FIFA that the fascist government would compensate for all financial expenses, and that settled the matter. The political views of the Italian nation led some countries to refuse to participate in the championship. For example, national teams from England, Sweden, and Spain did not attend. For Mussolini's fascist regime, football was a tool of propaganda, a way to showcase the superiority of the Italian nation. The championship kicked off on May 27, 1934, and fascist propaganda was in full swing. All 16 teams simultaneously played matches in 8 cities, carefully selected to demonstrate Italian ideals. New stadiums were constructed, and existing ones were reconstructed. For example, Mussolini declared Turin the main football city and built the Olimpico Gran Torino stadium there, with a capacity of 65,000 spectators. Italian propaganda tried its best to show that everyone in the country was happy and supported the fascist regime of Il Duce. Strong teams refusing to participate in the championship made it easier for the hosts to reach the final. In the final, Italy faced Czechoslovakia. Special piquancy of the situation gave the fact that just before the championship, the Czechoslovak government declared its support for the USSR. In Mussolini's eyes, it was an anti-fascist gesture, and the final was seen as a sort of a battle between the forces of communism and fascism. Italy emerged victorious. At the award ceremony, the fascist anthem Giovinezza was played. The winners were not only presented with the World Cup trophy, but also with a special cup personally ordered by Mussolini, which was 6 times larger than the official one. At the end of the tournament, Benito Mussolini and Adolf Hitler met for the first time. The meeting marked the beginning of events that foreshadowed World War II. The leader of Nazi Germany noticed how the championship was used for propaganda and its impact on boosting patriotic spirit. 2 years later, Hitler fully exploited this approach for his own purposes. Berlin was supposed to host the Olympics in 1916, but the outbreak of World War I disrupted those plans. After the war, Germany was not in a position to consider hosting the Games. The country had lost the war, faced sanctions, and was burdened with reparations. Germany was excluded from international sports events and did not participate in the Olympics of 1920 and 1924. However, the founder of the modern Olympic Games, Baron Pierre de Coubertin, consistently advocated for separating sports from politics. It was largely due to his insistence that Germany was chosen as the host country for the 1936 Olympics. Hitler became enthusiastic about the idea, and the Nazis spared no expense. In record time, a stadium with 86,000 seats, a swimming pool, an equestrian arena, an open-air arena, and the Olympic Village were built in the German capital. The Olympic Village, located 10 kilometers from Berlin, consisted of 150 buildings, not counting an artificial lake. Finished saunas and cafe terraces were installed. During World War II, the Olympic Village would be used to accommodate the wounded, and after the capture of Berlin, it would house the prisoners of war. They removed anti-Semitic slogans and advertisements from the streets of Berlin. Signs saying "Jews not welcome" were taken down from public places, and the media were prohibited from publishing anti-Jewish materials. To familiarize himself with the preparations for the Games in Berlin, the honorary president of the International Olympic Committee, Pierre de Coubertin, was invited. Shortly before this, he had retired from his position. In Berlin, he was given such a reception that he called Hitler one of the greatest creative spirits of the era. He considered Germany the custodian of Olympic ideals and even thought of making the country a permanent host of the Games. The Nazis even took a completely unprecedented step. They invited the renowned Jewish fencer, Helena Mayer, who lived in the USA, to represent Germany at the Olympics. She agreed, hoping that it would help her family leave the Third Reich. Helena won a silver medal and gave the Nazi salute on the podium, which drew criticism from the global press. After the Games, she immigrated back to the USA, while her relatives perished in concentration camps. But tourists and spectators were unaware that 2 weeks before the opening of the Olympics, the police conducted a raid on Roma people living in Berlin and the surrounding areas. They were arrested and held in a special camp in the Marzahn district. On August 1, 1936, Adolf Hitler declared the 11th Olympic Games open. The ceremony was directed by Joseph Goebbels' team, and the renowned composer Richard Strauss conducted the orchestra as Hitler arrived. Swastika flags fluttered everywhere, and 40,000 stormtroopers surrounded Hitler to separate him from the crowd. He released 20,000 carrier pigeons and delivered an impassioned speech. A zeppelin circled the stadium with the Olympic flag. A record 49 teams marched around the Olympic Stadium, and flag bearers were required to salute the Nazi leader. However, American athletes ignored this demand, and the USA team deliberately turned away from Hitler. The climax of the ceremony was the arrival of the torchbearer carrying the Olympic flame from the ancient Olympia. Thus, the tradition of lighting the Olympic flame owes its origins to the Nazis. The opening ceremony was televised for the first time, and the Olympic competitions became the subject of the famous film Olympia by Leni Riefenstahl, making it the first cinematic record of the Olympic Games in history. Another innovation was the broadcasting of events from the Olympic Arena, for which 33 public television theaters were built in Berlin. The first Olympic champion was German athlete Hans Wölke. Hitler invited him and 2 German women, who won gold and silver in javelin throwing, to his box. International Olympic Committee President Henri de Belli-Latour, warned Hitler that if he did not want to congratulate and shake hands with all the winners, then he should stop doing it with German athletes. Fearing that African-American athletes from the USA might become winners, Hitler stopped inviting champions to his box, and his fears were confirmed. The real star and the most outstanding athlete of the Games was African-American sprinter Jesse Owens, who won 4 gold medals. Hitler chose not to meet with him or the Jewish champions. Incidentally, some Jewish participants in the Games would soon face death in the gas chambers of concentration camps. Germany skillfully promoted the Olympics. Their propaganda emphasized the connection between the Third Reich and ancient Greece. The victories of German athletes were presented as achievements of German civilization, which rightfully inherited Aryan culture. Hitler achieved what he wanted. The world saw a great Germany and admired it. The grand parades, scale, and magnificence of the events created an illusion of prosperity and stability, effectively concealing the dark aspects of the regime, the persecution of political opponents, and racial policies. As soon as the Olympics ended, the Nazi regime resumed implementing expansion plans in Europe and intensified the persecution of Jews. 3 days after the Games, the head of the Olympic Village, Wolfgang Fürstner, committed suicide after learning that he had been dismissed from the army for concealing his Jewish ancestry. The Berlin Olympics became a notable example of how big sports can be used as a tool of propaganda and how it can influence global public opinion. Only 10 years later, the International Olympic Committee officially admitted his mistake in holding the Games in a state with a dictatorial regime. The Nazi Games in Berlin went down in history as one of the major missteps of the Olympic movement. In 1976, Argentina was chosen as the host country for the FIFA World Cup. The authorities hoped that hosting this major sporting event would attract investments, create jobs, and help the country overcome its crisis. The tournament's logo was based on President Juan Peyron's signature gesture of greeting the crowd with arms raised overhead. However, 2 years before the championship, a military coup led the General Jorge Videla took control of Argentina. Juan Peyron's wife, Isabel Peyron, who became the president after his death in 1974, was placed under house arrest and later exiled to Spain. Military coups were common in Latin American countries at the time, but the methods and ideas of the new Argentine leadership were particularly brutal, and the years of dictatorship became known as Dirty War. Mass kidnappings, torture, and summary executions were widespread. Despite the change of government, Argentina did not give up on hosting the World Cup. On the contrary, the military junta saw it as an opportunity to showcase a strong and independent image of Argentina to the world. Similar to what happened in Germany 40 years earlier, the authorities invested heavily in building new stadiums and renovating old ones. New roads, hotels, and airports were constructed to accommodate the event, and a television center was built to provide color broadcasting. The cost of preparing for the championship was estimated at $700 million. This led to a huge wave of criticism, as this amount was horrendous for a country facing economic and social problems. An interesting fact regarding the tournament's emblem: the military knew that it symbolized Peyron's gesture and attempted to change it. However, by the time, the design had already become a commercial brand and was widely accepted. So the junta had to give up trying to change it. A half a year before the start of the championship, a group of journalists organized a committee calling for national teams to boycott the event. Supporters of the boycott compared the upcoming championship to the Nazi Olympics. Caricatures of Videla were printed in the press, and altered versions of the tournament logo were published, showing it as a corridor of barbed wire. FIFA did not make loud statements. Major tournaments were already bringing in significant revenue. and relocating the championship to another country would have been financially disadvantageous. Moreover, Argentina received a $500 million credit from the International Federation. FIFA limited itself to receiving assurances from the junta about the security of the tournament. Argentina did not remain idle and organized a massive PR campaign. They denied accusations of a lack of democracy and called it misinformation. The upcoming championship was declared a crucial event for all of Latin America. They devised a strategy for working with the press, selecting influential journalists and supplying them with the right materials. Several documentaries were produced portraying Jorge Videla not as a tyrant, but as a wise and progressive leader. Among the esteemed guests of the tournament was Henry Kissinger, for whom they designed a special schedule filled with numerous receptions, meetings, and dinners. It is not surprising, as the former US Secretary of State always had a soft spot for dictators and authoritarian rulers. After the championship in Argentina, football officials re-evaluated the risks. Initially, the 1986 tournament was supposed to take place in Colombia, but the country was torn apart by criminal wars and the championship was moved to Mexico. The opening ceremony of the World Cup was a scene of hypocrisy and absurdity. Cardinal Juan Carlos Aramburu appeared before the audience and conveyed the Pope's blessing. Then the clergyman decided to dispel rumors about the country's situation. He claimed that all the missing Argentinians had long since left the country, and the lack of letters from them was merely a coincidence. All of this took place at the Monumental Stadium, just 1 kilometer away from a prison for dissidents. And during the matches, that prison was not empty. The World Cup turned out to be a success for the dictator. Argentina won the championship cup. Television broadcasts from the new television center conveyed the joyful atmosphere of a major sporting event. But behind the brilliant facade of the football celebration, there was a dark side: repression, executions, and the suppression of freedom of speech and dissidents. The regime remained in power for another 5 years. Towards the end of its rule, Videla initiated the Falklands War with the United Kingdom, which also had an impact on football. The famous Argentina-England match in the 1986 World Cup, with the hand of God and the goal of the century, became legendary. Many years later, Maradona referred to that goal as Argentina's revenge for the defeat in the Falklands War. The head of the military junta, Jorge Videla, was brought to trial and sentenced to various terms of imprisonment after democracy was restored in the country. The World Cup in Argentina serves as a reminder of how sport can not only be a tool of political propaganda, but also an instrument to conceal serious problems. The entire sports system in the Soviet Union was under state control and served its interests. The system of sports societies operated, and the strongest among them were associated with the power structures. This includes CSKA, Central Sports Club of the Army, and Dynamo, which were sponsored by the Ministry of Internal Affairs. Most of the leading Soviet athletes were also officers in the army, police, or other security agencies. This system has persisted in modern Russia, where sports also heavily rely on state funding. It's worth noting that this funding may not always be direct. For example, the state owns a controlling stake in the Gazprom Corporation, a sponsor of many sporting events. Apart from hockey players in the NHL and footballers playing in Europe, most other athletes and coaches are dependent on the ruling regime and serve as its propaganda mouthpieces. The Soviet Union hosted the Summer Olympics Games only once, in Moscow in 1980. However, Western countries decided to boycott the Games as a protest against the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Athletes from 65 countries chose not to participate in the Games, and even China, which had planned to participate for the first time in several decades. With the absence of strong competition, the Soviet Union naturally topped the medal standings. In retaliation, the Soviet Union boycotted the next Summer Olympic Games in 1984, which took place in Los Angeles. Most countries from the Socialist bloc joined the boycott as well. However, Socialist China sent its athletes to the Games on this occasion. As an alternative, the Soviet Union organized a series of sports competitions called Friendship 84 in socialist countries, but they did not fully replace the Olympics and did not continue in the following years. The 2014 Winter Olympics in Sochi and 2018 FIFA World Cup were prime examples of Russian propaganda. Russia used these events to showcase its role as a strong global power. The opening ceremony of the Olympics became a spectacle with elements of propaganda about country's history. Billions of dollars were spent on preparations for the Sochi Olympics, with a considerable portion ending up in the pockets of officials. The Russian team barely topped the medal count. After the Olympics, an investigation revealed a whole system of doping manipulation in Sochi. Russian athletes' dirty samples were replaced with clean ones, which was controlled by the Ministry of Sports with the help of the FSB. It turned out that the entire system of sporting victories in Russia was built on widespread doping use, and this was encouraged at the highest state level. The doping scandal severely damaged trust in Russian sports and created a negative image of the country in the sports world for years to come. As a result, Russia was banned from international competitions, including the Olympics, for 4 years starting in 2019. The Sochi Olympics took place against the backdrop of tragic events in Ukraine. The Ukrainian people overthrew the corrupt and pro-Russian President Yanukovych through the violent clashes. Despite Russian propaganda efforts, the Euromaidan events became the main global news, overshadowing the Olympic Games. In the last days of the Games, clashes between protesters and security forces in Kiev resulted in the death of more than 100 civilians. Immediately after the Olympics, taking advantage of the unstable political situation in Ukraine, Putin made the decision to annex Crimea, and then the outbreak of the Russian war in Donbass followed. The parallels with the Nazi Olympics are hard to ignore, as history often repeats itself. The policy of appeasement toward the Russian aggressor conducted by Western countries led to a sense of impunity. Just 4 years after the annexation of Crimea, Russia was allowed to host the FIFA World Cup. Once again, the aggressive country used the international competition for its propaganda and to whitewash its existing regime. After the World Cup, the media published evidence of bribery by several football or several FIFA officials, which ensured Russia the right to host the championship. Today's Russian sport is a massive propaganda machine, reproducing fans of the aging Russian dictator. Athletes become major stars, spreading the right messages and gradually transition from sports to politics, glorifying the Russian president and the ruling party. However, this does not prevent many well-known Russian athletes from living abroad. For instance, Elena Isinbayeva, who was the face of the Putin regime for many years, chose to settle in the warm climate of Tenerife, and living NHL legend Pavel Ovechkin, despite declaring his love for the Russian dictator, continues to live and compete in the USA. It almost becomes a game to find an American citizenship among Russian patriots. In response to attempts to exclude the uncivilized country from the Olympic movement, Russia resorted to its old proven method: organizing alternative competitions. Remember the Friendship Games, which the USSR organized as a boycott of the 1984 Olympics in Los Angeles? In 2024, the aggressor country is preparing to hold similar sporting events, naming them precisely the same way: Games of Friendship. This will take place right after the Olympics in Paris, scheduled for the summer of 2024. Once again, Russian politics demonstrated its complete control over sports and considers it an important instrument for propaganda and international PR. But such opinions are not held only by Russia. As we have already understood, dictatorial and authoritarian regimes eagerly exploit sports for their own interests. And China is no exception. In the 21st century, Beijing has hosted the Olympic Games twice: the Summer Olympics in 2008 and the Winter Olympics in 2022. On both occasions, the Chinese government and propaganda machinery utilized these events as a platform to showcase the country's achievements on the global stage. Huge sums were invested in preparations for the 2008 Olympic Games. A total of $45 billion was spent as the focus on the development infrastructure, transport systems, and building Olympic venues. For the 2022 Olympics, they spent significantly less, as they utilized previously built venues. The vibrant opening and closing ceremonies of the Games were meticulously orchestrated to display Chinese culture and traditions, making the Olympics in Beijing a carefully planned platform for state propaganda. The government aimed to portray the country as the most prosperous and innovative force in the Asian region. As with any host country, China sought to secure a respectable position on the medals table both in 2008 and 2022. However, unlike the Russians, who preferred using doping and purchasing athletes, China followed its own path. To groom future champions, there is a comprehensive system of children's sports camps and boarding schools. Once enrolled, children become true captives of these programs, and these camps are often referred to as relics from the 19th century. Besides regular studies, these children endure up to 5 training sessions per day. As a result, thousands of them emerge from these schools with shattered mental health and broken destinies. The Olympic celebration in Beijing in 2022 was once again marked by Russia. In the months leading up to the Games, Russia escalated tensions around Ukraine. Intelligence reports about a possible aggression diverted the attention of the global community from the sporting events. The atmosphere in Beijing during the Games felt like an impending catastrophe. Immediately after the Olympics, Russia launched a war by invading Ukraine. It became the #1 event covered by international media, overshadowing the discussions about the Olympics. It's unlikely that China, the host nation, was pleased with this turn of events. The New York Times, citing intelligence sources, reported that Xi Jinping personally asked Putin to postpone the invasion until after the Games. It seems that the Russian dictator blindly imitates his idol, Adolf Hitler, over and over again. In August 2008, during the Beijing Olympics, Russia invaded Georgia. After the Winter Games in Sochi, Russia annexed Crimea and ignited a war in the Donbas region. And after the second Games in Beijing, Russia once again engaged in a large-scale war with Ukraine. Sport outside of politics. Unfortunately, this principle has not stood the test of time. They are closely intertwined for many decades. Politics continues to influence sports and use it for its own interests. When politics becomes a dominant factor in sports events, it can lead to manipulation, doping scandals, and create a negative image of the country. Attempts to use sports for political propaganda diminish the significance of sporting achievements. At first glance, it seems quite simple to overcome the negative influence of politics on sports. It is necessary to return to the principles of good sportsmanship and fair play. Strict anti-doping control and compliance with sports rules, taking into account human rights and democratic principles. Only in this way can major sports continue their unique mission of uniting people and having a positive impact on society. And politics can and should become one of the factors of sporting prosperity in all countries. Will this be achieved? We'll see. To be continued.